For 3 days, Mia Bennett hid her agony from the world. Every breath was a fresh torment from 3 broken ribs and a lung that was slowly failing. It had been 72 hours since Derek Harrison, a 44-year-old director, had cornered her in a dark garage. He had beaten her so badly she could not recognize her own reflection. She spent those days covering the dark bruises with heavy makeup and binding her own chest with bandages she purchased with her final $20. She bit her lip to keep from screaming with every tiny movement. But Mia could not afford to break, not with her 19-year-old sister Rose in a hospital bed. Rose had a weak heart, and her life-saving surgery cost $300,000. Creditors called 6 times a day about her deceased mother's medical expenses. Her landlord had already evicted her, throwing her possessions onto the street. This single job was the only thing keeping her sister alive. So Mia endured the pain, wearing her trauma like a shield. She went to work each morning pretending she was not already broken, but a body can only withstand so much punishment. On that third day, while presenting to 20 powerful executives, her body finally rebelled. The room began to spin. Her legs gave out, and the world went sideways. She fell, but she never felt the impact. Strong arms encircled her waist just before she hit the hard marble floor. She saw massive hands covered in tattoos of serpents and roses. These were hands known for signing billion-dollar deals and for quiet violence. They belonged to the man who sat at the very head of the table. He was the one person no one ever dared to look at directly. His name was Matteo Valente, whispered like a threat throughout New York. At 36, he was the chief executive officer of Valente Corporation, a billionaire and the silent king of the city's underworld. For 8 long months, he had watched Mia from afar, intrigued by her strength. Now, as he held her, he felt something he had not felt in 20 years. It was rage, a powerful rage for her. In that silent room, Matteo looked at the injured woman in his arms and made a silent vow. The person who did this would beg for an end he would not grant. And this woman, who had fought so hard by herself, would never be alone again. Mia Bennett was not looking for a prince. She was about to find safety in the arms of a devil in a designer suit. Sometimes, when you have lost everything, a monster's protection is the only hope you have left. This story will show you that your darkest moment can become the beginning of everything. It is a reminder that strength is not about never falling. It is about what happens when someone finally catches you. If you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever hidden your pain behind a smile, this story is for you. Stay until the very end, because the truth about what Matteo does will leave you breathless. When Mia awoke in his penthouse, she understood that falling had been the easy part. The smell of sandalwood and the feel of soft sheets were the first things she noticed. Then her eyes opened, and pure panic took over. This was not her small, worn-out apartment. It was a massive room with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlooked the entire city of Manhattan at sunset. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her ribs stole her breath. That is when she saw the professional white bandages wrapped tightly around her chest. An intravenous line was taped to her arm. A heart monitor beeped rhythmically beside her. She was wearing a large black shirt that smelled of expensive cologne. The door creaked open, and a man who looked to be about 60 years old entered. He had silver hair and wore gold-rimmed glasses. "Miss Bennett," he said with a kind smile, "I am Dr. Thomas Reed." "Who are you?" she whispered, trying to pull away. "Where am I?" "Please be calm. You are safe," the doctor said gently. "This is Mr. Valente's penthouse. You were unconscious for nearly 10 hours. That name, Valente, set off alarms in her mind. Matteo Valente, the Viper of New York. She remembered the tattooed hands catching her just before she fainted. I need to go, she said, reaching for the IV in her arm. You cannot, Dr. Reed said, his voice now firm. You have 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and severe internal trauma. You almost did not survive. Mia froze. She knew she was hurt, but she had not realized how close to death she had been. Who did this to you? The doctor asked, his eyes searching hers. No one, she lied. It was an accident. The doctor was silent. He simply watched her, with an expression that had seen too many falsehoods. He nodded, made a note, and then left. He will come to see you now. Before she could ask who, the door opened again. The man who entered made her forget how to breathe. Matteo Valente was over 6 feet tall, with a powerful frame beneath a tailored black suit. His face was cold and severe, but his eyes were the most frightening part. They were the color of steel, like a storm about to break. He stopped by the bed and stood over her, an immense and intimidating presence. Mia Bennett, he stated, his voice low and smooth. 26 years old. You have worked at my company for 2 years and 3 months. You have a 19-year-old sister named Rose, who is in the hospital waiting for heart surgery. You owe $270,000 in medical bills. You also work nights at a bar in Brooklyn. 3 days ago, someone hurt you in my company's garage. Mia could not breathe. This man knew every single detail of her broken life. What do you want? She asked, her voice shaking. Matteo studied her. The important question, he said slowly, is who was bold enough to touch someone in my building, and why are you protecting him? He did not wait for an answer. He gave her one final, cold stare and then walked out of the room. His silence was more menacing than any threat. He had other ways of finding the truth. 20 minutes later, he sat in his office with Tony Russo. Tony was Matteo's head of security, a 42-year-old former soldier who specialized in making people talk. I need everything, Matteo said, his voice devoid of emotion. The garage security tapes, her work emails, and a complete investigation of Derek Harrison. Tony nodded once and disappeared. Matteo turned his chair to look out over the city. He had been watching Mia Bennett for 8 months. At first, he was just curious. She was different from the greedy, ambitious people who filled his company. She worked with a quiet intensity, never playing politics or seeking attention. He had seen her on camera countless times, working late into the night, eating a cheap meal by herself instead of a taxi. Small things told a big story. This woman was in a battle that no one else could see. And when she fell into his arms today, Matteo finally understood. She was fighting men who thought they were gods. His phone buzzed. Tony had sent the first file. It was footage from a garage camera, time-stamped 3 days ago at 11:17 at night. Matteo pressed play. For the next 14 minutes, he witnessed pure evil. Derek Harrison stepped from behind a pillar. Mia saw him and tried to run. He caught her by the hair, dragging her back. She used that pepper spray, but he slapped it away and hit her in the face. He beat her, kicked her, and slammed her head against the wall. It was 14 minutes of torture against a defenseless person. And for all 14 of those minutes, Derek Harrison laughed as if he were enjoying a meal. When the video stopped, Matteo's gray eyes had turned completely black. People who knew him called it the color of death. The last time his eyes held that color, 5 men disappeared forever. A second file arrived. It was a human resources document. Mia had reported Derek Harrison for sexual harassment 7 days prior. Margaret Shaw, the department head, had noted there was insufficient evidence. She recommended the employee be careful about making accusations against senior leadership. Matteo ground his teeth. A third file appeared. Derek Harrison's emails from the last 6 months. 37 messages to Mia Bennett. They contained suggestions, threats, and promises of a promotion for a dinner date. They also held warnings of what would happen if she said no. The last email was sent 2 days after the attack. It read, "I hope you learned your lesson, Mia. Do not reject a superior again." The fourth file was Derek Harrison's employment record. He had worked at Volante Corporation for 8 years with no disciplinary actions. But Tony found more. 4 female workers had quit in the past 3 years, all from Derek's department. 2 had moved away. 1 would not talk. The last one, a 23-year-old, jumped from a building 6 months after she resigned. Nobody looked into it. Nobody asked a thing. Derek Harrison's uncle was Richard Harrison, a man on the board of directors. The last file showed the hallway camera from the 32nd floor. An hour before the meeting today, Derek Harrison approached Mia's desk. He stopped, leaned over, and whispered to her. Mia jerked back like she had been burned. Derek just smiled and left. Mateo turned off the phone. He sat motionless in the darkness for 15 minutes. Then he made a call. His voice was calm, like he was ordering coffee. Bring Derek Harrison to warehouse number 3. Does the boss want him breathing? The line was quiet for 3 seconds. Alive? Mateo answered slowly, his words sharp, like poison. I want him alive long enough to know what regret is. Mia waited until 2 in the morning. The penthouse was completely silent. City lights cut faint lines across the dark floor. She had laid there for hours, faking sleep when the nurse checked on her while she planned her escape. She could not accept his help. She could not be in debt to Mateo Valente. She knew the stories about him. People who owed him became his puppets. Their strings pulled until they were no longer useful. Mia Bennett refused to lose the only thing she had left in this world, her freedom. She sat up slowly, biting her lip against the sharp pain. She pulled the IV from her arm, wiping the small dots of blood on the sheet. She set her feet on the ground. The marble floor felt like ice. Mia had no shoes, no phone, and no cash. She wore only the black shirt that belonged to the man she was fleeing. But it did not matter. She had faced much worse than a barefoot walk through New York at night. She opened the bedroom door into a long, dark hallway. Mia moved with one hand on the wall for balance. Each movement was agony as her broken ribs shifted. Her lungs burned when she tried to breathe deeply. But she thought of Rose and kept moving. Her sister was alone in a hospital, scared, wondering where she was. Mia reached the elevator at the end of the hall and pushed the button. Nothing happened. She tried again. The elevator was turned off. Her hope vanished. She looked at the emergency stairs. The metal door was heavy. She threw her entire weight against it, ignoring the fire in her chest. The door swung open, and Mia stopped cold. Mateo Valente sat on the top step. He held a glass of whiskey, his back to the wall. He looked like he knew she would be there, like he had waited for her all night. 2:17, he said, not looking at a watch. Your pain tolerance is higher than I thought. Mia took a step backward. I have to go. That is not a request, Mr. Valente. It is a statement. I am leaving this place now. Mateo rose to his feet. His movements were slow and radiated a quiet menace. He stood a full foot taller than her, and in the small stairwell, he seemed to fill the entire space. Where will you go, Mia? Back to the apartment where your landlord evicted you 3 days ago? Mia froze. Or maybe to Mount Sinai Hospital. Your sister is in room 72 on the 3rd floor. She is waiting for a new heart valve that you cannot pay for. Stop it. Mia's voice trembled. You have no right to look into my life. I have every right when an assault happens in my building, and I know more than you realize. Mateo moved closer. Mia retreated until the cold wall pressed against her back. I know you have worked 2 jobs a day for 14 months. I know you eat only once a day to save money for your sister's care. I know you sold your mother's car to cover some of the hospital expenses. And I know that yesterday morning you had exactly $37 in your bank account. Mia was speechless. She wanted to yell at him, to hit his cold, perfect face, to collapse and cry from the shame. But she did nothing. She just stood there, shaking, fighting not to break down again. What do you want from me? She finally asked, her voice raw. What must I do for you to get this help? Be your property? Your plaything? Mateo tilted his head. A flash of anger crossed his eyes. Is that what you think of me? I do not know what kind of man you are. I just know that nothing in this world is free. He was quiet for a long moment, watching her as if making a final judgment. Then his voice became softer. You are right. There is a price, but it is not what you imagine. Then what is it? Mateo reached out and gently touched her chin, lifting her face to his. You will stay here until you have recovered. You will tell me who did this to you and why you did not report him. And you will stop throwing your own life away like it means nothing. Mia wanted to fight back, to tell him she did not need his pity, to hide behind the defenses she had built for years. But his gray eyes held no pity. They held something much more frightening. It was real concern. That scared her more than any threat. The next morning, Mateo was true to his word. A polished black Mercedes was waiting downstairs. Tony Russo held the passenger door open. Mia came out of the elevator in clothes that had been left for her. They fit her perfectly, which was deeply unsettling. She did not ask how he knew her size. She did not want to know what else Mateo Valente knew. He did not go with her. Tony drove them through the Manhattan morning without a word. Mia sat in the back, the city blurring past the window. She saw nothing. Her mind was focused on one person, Rose. Her sister had not seen her for 4 days. To a 19-year-old girl with a failing heart, 4 days was a lifetime. The car pulled up to Mount Sinai Hospital. Tony opened her door. You have 1 hour. I will be here. Mia just nodded, too tired to argue. She felt eyes on her but lacked the will for a fight. All that mattered was seeing her sister. The hospital hallway was a long, white blur that smelled of antiseptic. It was a scent Mia knew too well. She had walked this corridor for 2 years as Rose's heart grew weaker. Each visit felt like it could be the last. She reached room 72. Taking a painful breath against her cracked ribs, she entered. Rose was tiny in the large bed, lost among the tubes and monitors, her brown hair fanned across the pillow. Her eyes, blue like Mia's, were empty until they saw her. Then they filled with tears, Mia. Rose's voice was thin but sharp. 4 days. You were gone 4 days and said nothing. I thought something terrible had happened. Mia sat by the bed, forcing her face to remain neutral. I am sorry. Work was just very busy. It was a lie. Rose grabbed her hand with surprising force. You lie all the time. You claim everything is fine, but you get thinner each week. You insist you are not tired, but you have the dark eyes of a ghost. Now you show up wearing so much makeup to hide something. Mia said nothing. Her sister was sick, not blind. Let me see, Rose insisted, reaching for her sister's face. Mia flinched away, but not fast enough. Rose's finger wiped the concealer from her cheek, showing the deep purple bruise underneath. The girl's eyes went wide with fear. Mia, who did this? No one, I fell. Stop lying to me. Tears streamed down Rose's cheeks. I am not a little girl. I know you are doing this alone. I know you have 2 jobs. I know you do not eat, so you can pay for my medicine. I know you are destroying yourself for my sake. Rose, that is not true. Then tell me the truth. Rose's body shook with sobs, making the heart monitor beep wildly. I am your burden. Without me, your life would be normal. You would not have to suffer like this. You would not get hurt because you need money for me, because you have to keep a job no matter what. Mia pulled her sister close, ignoring the sharp pain in her own chest. She held on tight, afraid Rose might disappear. Listen to me. Mia's voice shook, but was firm. You are not a burden. You are why I am here. When our mother passed, I wanted to give up. There was no reason to get out of bed. But then I saw you, 17 and alone, and I knew I had to be strong. You are all I have, Rose. I will do anything to save you. But you cannot keep doing this, Rose wept. You will die because of me. I could not live with that. I will not die, Mia promised, not fully believing her own words. I will survive, and you will have your surgery. But how? The money is impossible. Mia's thoughts turned to Matteo Valente. She pictured his expensive home, his unclear offer, and the price she would have to pay. I will figure it out, she said, and this time she meant it. The sisters held each other in the sterile room. The steady pulse of the monitor was a clock ticking down. Mia understood. She had no other path. She would go back to Matteo Valente, not by choice, but because he was the only way to save Rose. When Mia got back to the penthouse, Matteo was in the living room. He was sitting in a leather chair with a glass of whiskey, but he was not drinking. He just watched her with his unreadable gray eyes. How is your sister? He asked. Mia froze. She had expected anything but kindness. She is fine, Mia replied curtly. As fine as a person can be when they need an operation they cannot afford. Matteo placed his glass on the table and rose to his feet. The surgery is scheduled for next week. Mia stared. What? I contacted her doctor while you were there. Everything has been paid for. The best heart surgeon on the East Coast will perform the operation. No. Mia shook her head, taking a step back. I do not want your charity. This is not charity, Matteo said, his tone casual. This is justice. Mia was confused. Justice for what? Matteo paused, considering his words. He pulled out his phone, played a video, and held it out to her. You need to see this. Her hands trembled as she took it. The screen showed a living nightmare. It was a dark room with concrete walls. Derek Harrison was strapped to a chair, his face bloody and swollen. 3 large men surrounded him. She recognized one of them as S. from the penthouse. In the video, S spoke to Derek while holding a pair of pliers. Derek started screaming and pleading. Then a terrible sound filled the air as S broke each of his fingers, one by one. Mia dropped the phone like it was on fire. She felt sick and wanted to run away from that room, away from the man who stood before her with such terrifying calm. What did you do to him? She whispered. I did what was necessary. Matteo picked up his phone and stopped the video. He will not hurt another woman. Not because he is sorry, but because he no longer has hands to do so. Mia felt weak. She backed away until she hit the wall and slid to the floor. Matteo kept his distance. He simply stood and watched her, showing no remorse. You are a monster, Mia breathed. Yes, he agreed. I am. I have done things much worse than this, and I would do them again. But Derek Harrison received what he earned. Not just for hurting you, but for all the others. Mia looked up at him, her eyes burning. The others? Matteo sat in a chair across from her, giving her space. 4 women quit in the last 3 years after working for him. 2 of them left town completely. 1 will not speak of what happened. Another one, a 23-year-old, jumped from her apartment building 6 months after she resigned. Mia gasped. She took her own life because of him. Nobody looked into it. Nobody cared because Derek's uncle is on the company board. Human Resources was paid to ignore it. In this world, the powerful can do as they please. A long silence filled the room. Mia felt a war inside her. She was horrified by the violence, fun, yet relieved by the justice. A part of her was glad Derek Harrison could never harm anyone again. What gives you the right? She finally asked. Are you God? No. Mateo's voice was deep and cold. God shows mercy. I do not. He stood and looked down at her, his expression unreadable. The money for your sister is not a loan. It is compensation that Derek Harrison owed you. I took it from his accounts before he was unable to sign his name. You owe me nothing, Mia. The man who owed you has paid his debt. He walked to the door and paused. You should rest. Dr. Reed will check on you tomorrow. Then he was gone, leaving Mia alone with her storm of feelings. How could a man make her feel so terrified and so protected at the very same time? The first week at Mateo Valente's home was a quiet battle. Mia built a wall around herself. It was a wall of silence and distance, and she refused any kindness that was not essential. She spent her days in her room, emerging only for meals or for Dr. Reed's visits. She never spoke first, and her answers were always short. Yes, no. I am fine. Thank you. Mateo gave her space. He never pushed her to talk or invaded her privacy. He only saw her at dinner, where he sat at the head of a very long table. Mia sat at the other end, a great distance between them. She hated his composure. She hated how he watched her, as if he could see all her thoughts. She hated that he never got angry, no matter how cold she acted. But she hated most that she could not truly hate him. Every morning, she found breakfast waiting on a small table in her room. It was not fancy food. It was oatmeal with honey, just like her mother used to prepare, or toast with peanut butter, a favorite she had mentioned to a friend months ago. How could he possibly know, she wondered, but she never asked. On the third day, she saw her closet was full of new clothes. They were not expensive dresses. They were simple, comfortable clothes that matched her style. Soft sweaters, jeans that fit perfectly, and white sneakers. Even books were now on the shelf near her window. They were the same books she always checked out from the library, but could never afford to buy. Mia stood before the shelf, her hands shaking as she ran her fingers over their spines. The level of detail was unsettling. Someone knew her favorite books, her preferred foods, the exact style of clothes she liked. It should have felt like an invasion, but instead, she felt seen. For the first time, someone truly saw who she was. The feeling terrified her completely. She was not used to being taken care of. She knew only how to fight alone and get back up on her own. Mateo Valente's kindness was a shock to her system, and her only defense was to build her walls higher. On the fifth day, she could not take it. At 10 that night, she found Mateo reading by the fireplace. He looked up as she approached and simply waited. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice coming out harsher than she intended. Doing what? The food, the clothes, the books. Are you trying to purchase me? Mateo put the documents down and met her gaze with his calm, gray eyes. Do you believe every act of kindness has a hidden motive? I believe no one is kind without a reason, she replied. Especially a man like you. A man like me, he repeated, his tone curious, not angry. What do you know about men like me? I know you lead the Mafia. I know you end lives. I know you tortured Derek Harrison until he was no longer human. And you fear I will do that to you? No, Mia said, surprised to realize she spoke the truth. I am afraid that I will begin to trust you, and then you will betray me, just like everyone else has. A tense silence filled the space between them. Mateo rose and walked toward her, stopping at a careful distance. Who hurt you, Mia? Your father swore to protect his family, then died at work without a single dollar for you. Your mother promised never to leave, then cancer took her when you were just 22. Your ex-boyfriend promised love, then gave you 3 years of beatings before you escaped. And Derek Harrison promised to advance your career, then left you for dead in a parking garage. So, you ask me why I trust no one? It is because trust has only ever brought me pain. Mia did not know she was crying until a tear landed on her hand. She turned away, ashamed, but Mateo's voice stopped her. I am not your father, your mother, or the men who harmed you. I do not make promises. I only tell you the truth. You are safe here. I want nothing from you. Whether you believe me is your decision. He sat back down and returned to his reading, as if their conversation was over. Mia stood in the large room, realizing the walls she had built were starting to crumble. On the 8th day, a call came from the hospital. It was not about Rose. It was something far more shocking. Miss Bennett, this call is to confirm that all outstanding medical debts for your family have been paid in full. The finance officer's voice was professional and distant over the phone. Mia stood frozen. All debts? What do you mean, all of them? The employee read from a list. The cancer treatment for Mrs. Patricia Bennett, $243,000. The long-term care for Miss Rose Bennett for the last 2 years, $117,000. And the entire cost of her upcoming heart surgery, plus a 6-month recovery package. A total of nearly $500,000 was paid yesterday by a company called Valente Holdings. Mia could not recall how the call ended. When she came to her senses, she was outside Mateo's office, her fists clenched, her body shaking with pure rage. She threw the door open without knocking. Mateo was on the phone, speaking Italian. He saw her, ended the call with a short phrase, and fixed his gray eyes on her. He did not look surprised. He looked like he had been expecting her. $500,000, Mia said, her voice trembling with fury. You paid it all, without a word to me. Mateo leaned back in his chair, his calm composure making her angrier. Are you upset that your family's debt is gone? I am upset because you think you can control my life. You told me the surgery money was from Derek. You never mentioned my mother's debt or Rose's care because you knew I would say no. Of course I would have said no, Mia shot back, slamming her hands on his desk. You do not have the right. You have no right to erase my history like it is nothing. You cannot make me owe you a sum of money I could never repay. Mateo stood up. His size and presence forced Mia to take a step back, despite her anger. You owe me nothing. I do not want your repayment. Then what do you want? Mia yelled. Nobody gives away $500,000 for no reason. What is your price? Do you want me as your mistress? Your property? Do you want me to sell my soul for your money? Mateo's eyes went dark. For the first time, she thought she saw a flash of hurt in his expression. But it was gone in an instant. Is that what you think of me? He asked, his voice low and cold. I do not know what to think of you, Mia answered, her voice shaking. I only know that every person who has ever helped me has demanded a price that was far too high. And you have given me so much, I am terrified of what you will ask for in return. The silence between them was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. Mateo finally let out a breath. It was a rare sound of fatigue from a man who seemed unbreakable. 20 years ago, he began, his voice so quiet she had to lean in. My father was dying of liver cancer. He needed an operation, but we were poor. We were just immigrants, trying to make it in this city. My mother begged for help. She sold everything we had, but it was not enough. He looked directly at Mia. My father died because we could not find $50,000. For the wealthy, that is the price of one party. For us, it was life or death. I stood at his grave and I made a vow. If I ever had the power, I would never let another person feel that kind of pain. Mia was speechless. She felt her anger dissolving, replaced by a startling sense of understanding. $500,000 is what I make in 2 weeks, Matteo said. But for you, it removes the weight of a lifetime. What could I possibly demand from you for something that costs me so little? He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the veins on his hands. I do not want your body. I do not want your soul. I do not want you to repay me. I just want you to stop destroying yourself over debts that were never your burden to carry. Tears streamed down Mia's face, and this time she did not fight them. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much about me? Matteo did not answer with words. He only looked at her with those intense gray eyes. In his gaze, Mia saw something she had never received from anyone before. It was pure, unconditional respect, and it broke down her defenses more than anything he could have said. The day of Rose's surgery came quickly. Mia woke at 4 in the morning, her mind racing. She sat in the dark, watching the lights of Manhattan appear outside her window, and prayed to any god that might exist. Please let my sister survive. Please do not take the only person I have left. Matteo had handled every detail. He hired the best surgeon and the top medical team. He even reserved an entire private floor of the hospital for security. When Mia asked him why, he said simply, because your sister deserves to be treated like royalty on the most important day of her life. Mia was speechless. She arrived at the hospital at 6. Rose was already prepped for surgery, her face pale, but trying to smile for her sister. I am scared, Rose whispered when Mia held her hand. I know, Mia said, her own voice steady despite her heart shattering inside. But it will all be okay. You will go to sleep, and when you wake up, you will have a brand new heart. You promise? I promise, Mia said, knowing it was a promise she could not guarantee. Some things were out of her hands, but she had to calm her sister's fear. A nurse arrived to take Rose to the operating room. Mia walked with them until the doors swung shut, separating them. She could only watch as her sister disappeared from view. And then she waited. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 5. 6 hours felt like an eternity. Mia sat in the waiting area, unable to eat, drink, or move. She stared at the operating room doors, believing that if she looked away, even for a moment, something terrible would happen. She had no idea Matteo was in the room until he set a glass of water down beside her. You need to drink, he said, his voice quiet and soft. Mia shook her head, but did not speak. She was afraid her voice would break if she tried. Matteo did not insist. He just took the chair next to her and sat in silence. He did not ask questions or offer empty words of comfort. He was just there, a solid presence in the middle of her personal hurricane. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each sound a countdown to disaster. Every minute that went by was a minute Rose might not have. Every second of quiet was filled with terrible thoughts. Rose not waking up, Rose dying during the surgery, Rose leaving her all alone, just like her father and her mother, just like everyone else she ever cared about. After 7 hours, the doors to the operating room opened. A surgeon appeared in his green scrubs, his mask hanging at his neck. Mia shot to her feet, her own heart stopping for one terrible, endless second. The doctor's voice was bright when he told Mia the news. He said the surgery went perfectly. The new valve was flawless. Rose would need to recover, but she was going to be healthy. She would have a normal life. Mia had no memory of her own response. Her legs simply gave way. If Matteo had not been there to catch her, she would have hit the hard hospital floor. All the strength she had maintained for years finally broke. She wept. These were not her usual quiet tears. They were the ragged, agonizing sobs of a person who had carried an impossible weight for too long. It was the sound of finally letting go. Relief poured out of her because Rose was going to live. The fear of losing her was finally gone. Pain followed from every sleepless night and every missed meal. She cried for all the time she wanted to collapse, but forced herself to stand. Guilt came last, for cursing her fate, for wanting to quit, and for wishing she did not have to bear it all by herself. Then she cried with gratitude for the man who was holding her up. He had appeared from nowhere and had changed her entire world. Mateo remained silent. He simply held her close, one arm around her back and the other hand on her head. He let her break down against his chest. He did not ask her to be quiet. He offered no hollow words that things would get better. He just stood there, a patient and steady presence, waiting for the storm inside her to pass. When Mia finally raised her head, her face was soaked and her eyes were swollen. She met Mateo's gray eyes and saw an emotion she was afraid to identify. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice broken. "Thank you for this." Mateo raised a hand, his thumb gently brushing the tears from her cheek. "There is nowhere else I would rather be," he said. For the very first time, Mia knew he was telling the truth. After that moment, something between Mia and Mateo started to shift. The changes were so small that she barely saw them happening until she looked back. There were no dramatic confessions or sudden breakthroughs. It was more like tiny fractures forming in the icy wall around her heart, letting the light in one crack at a time. During the second week, Mia stopped eating in her room. She came to the dinner table and sat across from Mateo. They ate without speaking, but the quiet had changed. It was no longer cold or strained. It was the calm of two people who no longer needed words. The next day, she found Mateo reading in the living room late at night. She had intended to go back to her room, but she sat on the other sofa instead. She opened her own book, and they read in each other's company until midnight. As Mia got up for bed, she told him good night. Mateo gave a small nod, his eyes warmer than she had ever seen them. On the third day, Mia decided to cook. She walked into the kitchen at 6 o'clock that evening. She found fresh ingredients that the staff kept stocked and started making a simple pasta dish her mother taught her. When Mateo arrived home, he paused in the kitchen doorway. He watched her stirring the sauce with clear surprise. "You do not have to do that," he told her. "I know," Mia said, not looking at him, "but I want to." That night, they ate the pasta she had made. Mateo told her it was the finest meal he had eaten in years. Mia did not believe him, but a real smile touched her lips for the first time in what felt like forever. On the fourth day, Mia went to see Rose. She told her sister about the man who was giving her a place to stay. She was careful not to mention his name, the Mafia, or anything violent. She only said he was someone who had helped her immensely. Rose watched her with a curious and playful light in her eyes. "You like him, do you not?" Mia denied it instantly, but her face grew hot, and Rose began to laugh. It was the brightest, most wonderful sound Mia had heard from her sister in 2 years. On the fifth day, Mateo had to work very late. Mia could not fall asleep. She sat in the living room, insisting to herself that she was only reading, not waiting. But when the elevator arrived at 1 in the morning, carrying an exhausted Mateo, she had a cup of ginger tea ready for him. He looked at her, then at the cup, and back to her again. His expression was impossible for her to read. "You did not have to wait up for me," he said. "I know," she answered, "but I want to." They both recognized she had said the same thing about cooking. Mateo sat down and drank the tea without another word. They shared the quiet of the late night as if it was something they did every day. On the sixth day, Mia laughed. It was not a polite smile, but a genuine laugh that escaped when Matteo spilled coffee on his white shirt and swore under his breath in Italian. He gave her a look of pretend offense, which only made her laugh even more. After her laughter died down, she found him just watching her with an intense expression. "You have a beautiful smile," he said, his voice quiet and genuine. "You should use it more often." Mia was speechless. She turned away quickly, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. On the seventh day, a frightening thought struck Mia. She did not want to leave anymore. It was not because of the princess of the stunning penthouse or the comfortable life. It was because of the man who lived there, the man she had promised herself she would never trust. She was falling into a deep chasm that was shaped just like him. And the most terrifying part was not the fall itself. It was the realization that she had no desire to stop it. That evening, Mia saw Matteo on the balcony alone, looking over the sparkling lights of Manhattan. She almost turned away to leave him in peace, but she was drawn to his rival gangs. The way he stood there stopped her. His shoulders were hunched, losing the confident line she was used to. His knuckles were white from gripping the railing. As she got closer, she saw an old photograph in his hand. The corners were soft and worn, like it had been treasured for years. "What day is it?" Mia asked softly, pausing nearby. Matteo did not turn, but he did not push her away. "The day my father died," he said, his voice quiet and far away. 20 years ago, on this day, he died in my arms." Mia moved to his side. Careful not to touch him, she looked at the photo. A kind-faced man stood next to a boy of 15 or 16 who had Matteo's gray eyes. "He looks like a good man," she said. "He was the best I ever knew," Matteo answered, and in that moment, Mia heard a crack in the voice of New York's most feared man. He came to this country at 20, with only $500. He wanted to build a new life. He worked 16 hours a day, every day, doing any job he could find. He met my mother in a small church and married her when they had nothing but their love. I was born a year later. He paused, staring into the night. My father opened a small grocery store when I was 7. We were not wealthy, but we were happy. Every night, he read me a story. He told me, "Son, never let this hard world make you a bad person." Matteo's voice grew sharp. He was wrong. "What happened?" Mia asked, though she dreaded the answer. He finally turned to her. His gray eyes held a darkness she had never seen. "When I was 16, a local gang demanded protection money. My father refused. He said he would rather die than give in to criminals." He took a shaky breath. "So they killed him." Mia covered her mouth, her chest aching. It was a Saturday night. 4 men with guns. My father hid me in a corner and stood in front of me. He begged them to let me live. He told them to take anything they wanted, but to leave his son alone. Tears streamed silently down Matteo's face. Mia knew he had not allowed himself to cry in a very long time. They shot him 7 times while I watched. 7 times. I could only watch as he fell, his blood pooling on the floor. He was still whispering my name. "Matteo, my son, do not be afraid." Those were his final words. I held him until the police came, until his blood stained my clothes. I swore that no one would ever have power over me again. Mia said nothing. She just reached out and gently touched his arm, offering all the comfort she could. After the funeral, my mother fell apart, Matteo said, his voice empty, like he was telling a stranger's story. She stopped eating and sleeping. She just cried my father's name. 6 months later, she was gone. The doctor said it was a heart attack, but I knew the truth. She died because she could not live without him. At 17, I was an orphan with nothing. He turned back to the city, his voice becoming hard as stone. I had two choices. I could die like my parents, or I could become something to be feared. I chose to be feared. I found the same gang that killed my father and joined them. I learned to fight and to make people afraid. When I was ready, I hunted down every man from that night. I made their deaths slow and painful. He looked at Mia, hiding nothing. I built this empire from that moment. I became the monster everyone fears. I did everything my father taught me not to do. I do not regret it. In this world, good men like my father die. Monsters like me survive. Mia looked into his gray eyes, which were filled with darkness and pain. She finally understood. Matteo Valente was not born a monster. The world had made him one, and inside that powerful man was still a 16-year-old boy crying as he held his dying father. It was 3 in the morning, and the penthouse was dark and silent. Mia could not sleep. Matteo's story echoed in her mind. The images felt as real as her own memories. A young boy covered in his father's blood, gunshots in the night. She knew that kind of pain. She knew what it was like to lose everything and be forced to go on living. She tossed again before finally giving up and slipping on a robe. A dim light from the kitchen guided her. Someone else was already there. Mia walked in to see Matteo by the island. A glass of whiskey sat untouched in his hand as he stared at nothing. He wore a simple black t-shirt and pants. He looked softer, more like a normal man than a powerful boss. "You cannot sleep either?" Matteo asked without looking, as if he sensed her there. Mia came closer. "Your story is stuck in my head." He turned to face her. "I should not have told you. It is my burden, not yours to carry." "No," Mia said, shaking her head. "I want to know you. I want to understand." "Why?" "Because you understood me," she answered, her voice a whisper. "You knew all about my pain before I said a word. You saw the weight I carried and the nights I spent alone. You did not judge me or pity me. You just helped me. I think I owe you the same kindness." Matteo put his glass down and faced her completely. In the faint light, his gray eyes were warmer. They were not cold steel, but like the sky after a storm. "You do not owe me anything, Mia." "I know," she said, "but I want to give this to you. Not because I have to, because I want to." A long silence settled between them, but it was not awkward. It felt like they were standing on the edge of something important, both aware, both hesitant. Mia was the first to speak. "Tonight on the balcony, when you cried," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I realized something." "What?" "That you are not a monster. You are a man who was hurt so badly that you used darkness as a shield. I understand that. I have done the same thing." Matteo just stared at her, and she saw something new in his eyes. It was not calculation or control. It was vulnerability. It was the loneliness of a man who has been at the top for too long, with no one beside him. "Are you not afraid of me?" he asked, his voice raw. "I should be," Mia confessed. "You are everything I was warned about. Dangerous and ruthless. But you are also the man who saved me when I was falling. You rescued my sister. You showed me that darkness can sometimes be a shelter, not something to fear." Mia moved closer until only inches separated them. She looked up into his eyes. In that instant, all the fear, all the reasons to stay away, simply disappeared. "What do you want?" Matteo asked. His voice was low and trembled slightly, like he was holding his breath. Mia answered without words. She rose to her toes, put her hand on his chest, and felt his heart pound against her palm. Then she kissed him. Their first kiss was not gentle. It was filled with weeks of unspoken feelings. The anger from their first meeting, the caution, the slow building trust, and the deep desire. Matteo kissed her back with a passion that left her breathless. One of his hands went to the back of her neck. The other pulled her tight against him. He kissed her like a drowning man who had just found air. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily, their foreheads touching. "You know what this means, right?" Matteo whispered, his breath warm on her lips. "If you come into my world, you can never leave. I will not let you." Mia opened her eyes to meet his intense gaze. "Maybe I do not want to leave." That was all he needed to hear. He kissed her again, deeper this time. It was a promise that from now on, she was his, and he would destroy anyone who tried to harm her. In Matteo Valente's life, happiness was always short-lived. Mia was about to learn that lesson in the cruelest way. In the 3 days after that kiss, everything changed. The ice between them had melted. They shared breakfast. They talked. And every night, Matteo kissed her before she went to her room. He said he wanted to wait until she was fully healed, but his kisses were enough to make Mia feel weightless. She had forgotten that in the shadows, other predators were always watching. Richard Harrison was not a man who accepted loss. When he found out what Matteo Valente had done to his nephew, Derek, he promised revenge. Richard was on the board of Valente Corporation, but he had other, darker connections. He had dedicated 2 weeks to gathering intelligence. He tracked every action of New York's most dangerous snake and found his one critical vulnerability, a woman named Mia Bennett. A direct assault on Mia and inside the secure penthouse would have been foolish. Richard needed a softer target, someone more accessible. He found Rose. It was now the 5th day since the operation. Rose was out of intensive care and in a standard room. Her recovery was going so well, the doctors said she could go home in a week. Mia had been there that morning with flowers. She told Rose about Matteo, leaving out the darker details of his life. Rose had teased her until she blushed, and they had shared a moment of pure happiness, feeling as though their troubles were finally over. Mia left the hospital at 3 o'clock, promising she would be back later that night. She had no way of knowing it was the last time she would see her sister smile for a long, long time. At 6 o'clock, Mia's phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she did not recognize. She opened it, and her blood ran cold. It was a video. Rose was bound to a chair in a dark space, a blindfold over her eyes and tape across her mouth. The young girl was crying, her entire body shaking in her hospital gown. A man's voice filled the recording, sharp and cruel. "Hello, Miss Bennett. The name is Richard Harrison. I trust you recognize it. My nephew Derek is unable to call you himself since he no longer has fingers to use a phone, but I can pass along his regards." The voice gave a short, ugly laugh. "You have 2 hours. Come to warehouse number 7 at the Brooklyn docks. Come by yourself. Do not tell Valente. Do not bring a single person. If I even see a shadow that is not yours, your sister will die. I will then send you pieces of her in gift-wrapped boxes." The video stopped. Mia stood completely still in the living room, frozen by terror. Her hand trembled so badly she almost dropped the phone. This could not be happening. Rose had just come from surgery. Her heart was still too weak. A shock like this could end her life. Mia looked around the empty room. Matteo was in a meeting and would be gone for an hour. She could tell him, let him handle this monster the way he handled Derek. But Richard's words were clear. If Matteo appeared, Rose would die. Mia could not bet her sister's life on anything. She wrote a quick note, leaving it on Matteo's desk. Then she changed her clothes and stepped into the night alone. She knew it was a trap. She knew she might not come back. But she had made a promise to her mother to protect her sister, and she would keep it, even if it cost her everything. The Brooklyn docks at night were another world. It was nothing like the glamour of Manhattan. There were no bright lights, no streams of cars, only a thick darkness and the sting of salt on the wind. The air howled through rusted containers that stood like iron tombs. Mia left the taxi 200 meters from warehouse number 7 and told the driver not to wait. She was alone on the empty road, her heart pounding inside her chest. Her ribs had not fully healed, and each deep breath was a shot of pain. But physical pain meant nothing compared to the fear crushing her soul. Rose, her sister, was in the hands of the enemy, alone, terrified, and seconds from death if Mia made a single mistake. Mia took a deep breath and began to walk toward the warehouse. Her shoes made no sound on the cracked concrete. She had turned her phone off. She knew if Mateo called and she did not answer, he would find a way to track her. She could not allow that. She could not let him show up and make things worse. Richard Harrison's threat was simple. Come alone or Rose dies. Warehouse number 7 loomed in front of her. It was a huge iron building with broken windows and a door of rusted metal. A faint yellow light seeped through the cracks. It was the only sign that someone was inside. Mia stopped at the entrance. She clenched her hands into fists to keep them from shaking. She came with no weapon, no plan, and no one to help her. She had only herself and her love for her sister. She hoped it would be enough. She pushed the heavy door. Metal screamed against metal. Inside, the warehouse was a giant space with only a few hanging bulbs. They cast pale circles of light in an ocean of darkness. And in the middle of the room, Rose sat on a chair, tied, blindfolded, and her mouth sealed. The young girl was crying, her shoulders shaking with muffled sobs. Mia's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Rose, I am here. I am here for you. She started to walk toward her sister, but slow clapping echoed from the darkness. How touching. Richard Harrison's voice was filled with mockery and poison. Sisterly love is a beautiful thing. He stepped out from behind a steel pillar. He wore a gray 3-piece suit, as if he were at a party instead of a kidnapping. 5 large armed men followed him. Mia saw them and knew she had no chance to fight. I am here, she said, keeping her voice strong. Let my sister go. Richard laughed, a cold sound in the huge warehouse. Let her go? After what your lover did to my nephew, Derek will never hold a pen again. His hands were crushed. And you think I would let you go so easily? I did nothing. Derek attacked me. He got what he deserved. Maybe, Richard shrugged. But an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Valente took my nephew's hands. I will take his heart. And you, beautiful Miss Bennet, you are that heart. Mia felt the blood run cold in her body. He was never going to release Rose. He planned to kill them both. This was not an exchange. It was a trap. What do you want? She asked, trying to create more time, though she did not know why. I want Mateo Valente to suffer, Richard answered, his eyes burning with madness. I want him to know how it feels to lose the one thing he cares about. I want him on his knees, begging like an animal. And when he comes here for you, I will kill you in front of him, then kill your sister, then kill him. He is insane, Mia thought. Richard Harrison was lost in his own hatred. He does not know I am here, Mia said. I did not tell him. He is not coming. Richard looked at her with fake sadness. Oh, you are so naive. Do you think the Serpent of New York does not watch you 24 hours a day? Do you think he let you leave without knowing where you were going? He checked his watch. I expect he will be here in about 15 minutes. And that is when the fun begins. Mia looked at Rose, at her sister trembling with fear, and she knew she had to do something. She could not just stand here and wait for death. She survived Derek's attack. She survived years of hell with her ex-boyfriend. She survived the death of her parents and a mountain of debt. She would not die here, and she would not let Rose die. 12 minutes later, Everything exploded into chaos. There was no sound, no warning, just the lights in the warehouse going out all at once. Richard Harrison cursed and yelled for his men to use their flashlights. But before anyone could move, the first gunshot sounded. One of Richard's 5 men went down, his knee shattered, his scream cutting through the dark. A second shot followed, then a third. In 10 seconds, 3 men were on the floor, twisting in pain, but they were still alive. The shooter was not trying to kill them. The shooter was aiming to disable them. Someone wanted them alive to feel what was coming. Mia used the confusion and ran to Rose, covering her sister with her own body. She ripped the tape from Rose's mouth and pulled at the ropes on her wrists, while gunfire and screams filled the air. "Sister, sister, what is happening?" Rose cried, her eyes still covered, her hands grabbing Mia's shirt. "It is okay. Everything will be okay," Mia whispered, though she was not sure she believed it. "Stay low, do not move." The lights suddenly turned back on, and Mia froze at what she saw. Matteo Valente stood in the middle of the warehouse. His black suit was perfect. His gun was still smoking. Around him stood Tony, Sal, and at least 20 other men, all armed, closing in on Richard Harrison's men. 4 of Richard's 5 gunmen were on the ground, moaning from their shattered limbs. Only one was still standing beside him, shaking, his gun aimed at nothing. And Richard Harrison, who was laughing only minutes ago, was now pale as a ghost. "Valente," he said, his arrogance completely gone. "How did you get here so fast?" Matteo did not answer him. He just walked forward slowly, each step a threat in the new silence. His gray eyes were not steel. They were black, the color of death, a color that everyone knew was a bad sign. "Did you really think I let her leave, without knowing where she was going?" Matteo finally said. His voice was low, and every word dripped with poison. "Did you think anything happens in this city? Did you think I was unaware? I knew she was leaving the penthouse before her foot crossed the elevator threshold. I knew her destination before the taxi even stopped. And I knew you had her sister the second your men set foot in that hospital." He came to a halt just a few feet from Richard, his weapon aimed directly at the man's forehead. "You made a critical error. You assumed I would hesitate, that I would panic. You thought I would charge in here by myself like some fool from a movie. I am not a desperate lover, Harrison. I am Matteo Valente. When someone takes what belongs to me, I do not perform rescues. I perform erasures." Richard started to shake. He raised his hands and stumbled backward until he hit the wall. "We can make a deal. I have wealth and influence. I can get you whatever you desire." Matteo cocked his head, pretending to weigh the offer. Then he pulled the trigger. The round ripped through Richard's thigh. The man shrieked and fell to the ground as blood sprayed onto the concrete. "I want you to feel pain," Matteo said, stepping over the man's writhing body. "And everything I want, I already possess." He looked toward Mia and Rose. The darkness in his eyes softened to gray the moment he confirmed they were unharmed. He gave Tony a nod, a silent order to escort them out. Tony gently helped Rose stand. The young woman trembled and wept, holding on to Mia, as if her life depended on it. Mia went with them, but cast one final look behind her. Matteo stood in the blood-stained warehouse, a figure surrounded by his fallen enemies and his loyal men. He looked like a war god summoned from the depths of hell. In that instant, Mia understood she was not scared of him. She never really had been. She was scared of a world without him. "Is he going to be all right?" Rose whispered once they were outside, where more dark cars were idling. Mia glanced back at the building and heard the screams from within. She knew Richard Harrison would not die tonight. He would pray for it. "He will be fine," Mia answered, and for the first time, she had no doubt. "He is Matteo Valente. He is always fine." Mateo did not get back to the penthouse until 4 in the morning. Mia was waiting on the sofa in the living room. She could not sleep, though Tony had insisted she rest after the hellish night. Rose was safe in a separate secure apartment with doctors and a security detail working around the clock. A mild sedative had finally helped her fall asleep, but Mia could not rest. It was not fear that kept her awake. It was the need to see him, to confirm he was safe. She had to say the words she had kept inside for hours. The elevator doors slid open, and she shot to her feet. Mateo walked in. His suit was gone, replaced by a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. Dried blood streaked his wrists and forearms. He froze when he saw her. His gray eyes assessed her instantly, and his expression softened. "You need to be asleep," he said. His voice was tired but kind. "I could not sleep until I knew you were safe," Mia said, moving closer. "Are you injured?" "No." Mateo shook his head. "None of this blood is mine." A heavy silence filled the space between them. They stood in the middle of the vast living room, shadows stretching across the floor. Mia had 1,000 things to say, but no idea where to begin. So she spoke the first words that surfaced. "I am sorry." Mateo's brow furrowed. "For what?" "For leaving like I did. For believing I could fix it on my own. For not having faith in you." Tears stung her eyes, but she fought them back. "I know you are furious. I was reckless, but Rose is my sister. I could not gamble with her life." Mateo remained silent for a long moment. It was long enough that Mia began to think he was too angry to even respond. Then he sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Do you want to know what made me the most angry?" His voice was low and strained. "It was not that you left. It was not that you failed to tell me. It was the letter you left for me." Mia blinked. "What did it say?" "You wrote that if something were to happen to you, I should look after Rose. You wrote that you had no regrets. You wrote that the last few weeks had been the best of your life." Mateo stepped toward her, his gray eyes blazing with a mix of fury and anguish. "You wrote it as if you had already accepted your own death, as if your life had no value, as if you were a mere sacrifice for your sister's safety, as if you were clueless that your death would make me burn this whole city to ash." Mia was speechless. She had braced for his anger over her disobedience, over her recklessness, over the risk to his plans. She never imagined he would be angry because she was prepared to die. "I am sorry," she whispered once more, and this time she let the tears fall. "I saw no other way. I only knew that I could not let Rose die. I cannot lose another person." "And you believe I can bear to lose you?" Mateo demanded, his voice shaking. "You think for 8 months I watched you, saved you, and protected you, just to let you walk toward your own end? What kind of man do you take me for?" "You love me?" Mia asked, her heart stopping for a second. Mateo went still, as if the words had surprised even himself. He let out a long breath, and his shoulders slumped, the night's exhaustion finally showing. "I believe that has been obvious for some time," he said gently. "I love you, Mia Bennett. I am not sure when it started. It might have been when I found you in that meeting. It might have been before. I just know that when you fell into my arms, I promised myself I would never let you fall again. And tonight, reading your letter, thinking I had lost you, I knew I could not exist in a world where you were not." Mia closed the gap between them and threw her arms around his waist, holding him as if he might fade away. She felt his strong arms wrap around her in return, holding her like she was the most fragile thing in the world. "I love you too," she murmured into his chest. "I love you, and I know exactly who you are. I love you knowing the dangers of your world, and I am choosing to be in it. Not from debt, not from fear, but because I refuse to live in a world that does not have you." Mateo leaned back and tilted her chin up, looking directly into her eyes. "Are you certain? Because if you stay, I will never let you go. You will belong to me, completely. Mia smiled through her tears. I have belonged to you since the day you caught me, before I hit the floor. That was all Matteo needed. He kissed her then, a kiss that was deep and tender and filled with the promise of a future they knew would be difficult, but one they would face as one. 3 months passed. Mia Bennett stood before a mirror in the penthouse dressing room and barely knew the woman who stared back. The skin that was once pale from exhaustion and stress was now healthy and bright. The eyes that had been shadowed with worry now glowed with a joy she never thought she would have. Her dark, shining hair rested on the shoulders of a sharp black suit. Pinned to the lapel was a new name tag. Mia Bennett, Director of Strategic Operations, Valente Corporation. Her promotion had come 2 months ago. It was not because she was with the chief executive officer. It was because Matteo had told her, looking her right in the eye, that she earned that role long before they met. He said he was just fixing the mistake of others who had overlooked her talent. Mia's new office was next to Matteo's on the top floor of the 52-story tower. She managed a team of 15 people, controlled her own project budgets, and had a seat at every major meeting. The colleagues, who once ignored her, now gave her respectful nods in the hallway. This was not from fear of Matteo. It was because Mia had proven her worth over the past 2 months, making every project she managed a resounding success. Margaret Shaw, the human resources head who shielded Derek, was gone within the first week. The whole department was rebuilt around an anonymous reporting system for harassment, overseen by an outside firm. Mia created that system herself, and Matteo approved it without changing a thing. Richard Harrison was forced off the board, his finances were seized, and he now sat in a federal prison awaiting trial for crimes that included kidnapping and conspiracy. As for Derek Harrison, his exact location was unknown. He had simply fled the city, never to be seen again. But the biggest transformation in Mia's life was not about her job or newfound influence. It was Rose. Her sister was in perfect health. The surgery was a 100% success. The new heart valve functioned flawlessly, and Rose had started her first semester at Columbia University with a full scholarship. Mia never asked who arranged it, but she had a strong feeling Matteo was involved. Rose had a secure apartment close to the university, with quiet protection, keeping watch from afar. Every weekend, she visited the penthouse for dinner with her sister and the man she'd like to call her scary brother-in-law. Matteo always acted annoyed when Rose called him that, but Mia saw how much he cared for the young woman. He found a tutor for her when she had trouble with her economics class. He had flowers delivered to her room after she passed her midterm exams, and he threatened to investigate any boy who got too close to her, a fact Rose found both terrifying and hilarious. We are like a real family, Rose said during dinner last week, her eyes wet with happy tears. I do not remember the last time life felt this good. Not since Mom was here. Mia hugged her sister and cried, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of peace. You touched what was mine, Richard. Now you pay. Those were the last words Mia heard as Matteo's men led her away. She saw Richard Harrison on his knees, his face pure terror. She knew his fate was worse than death. A week later, Mia felt a new peace, watching Rose play in a penthouse garden. Her life had transformed in just 3 months. She went from a hunted woman to the partner of the city's most powerful man. No longer hiding her pain, she was protected and loved. Each morning, she woke next to Matteo. That night, on the balcony, Manhattan glittered below them like scattered stars. The autumn air did not touch her in Matteo's arms. What are you thinking? He asked. Mia smiled softly. I was remembering my first time here. 3 months ago, with 3 broken ribs, I thought I might die. She looked at him. Now, I have a life I never dreamed of. With you. Mateo turned her to face him. When you collapsed that day, I thought I was saving you, he said. But the truth is, you saved me. Me? Mia asked, surprised. My world was dark for so long, he answered, touching her face. You reminded me what love felt like. I thought I only deserved to be feared. Then you came. You saw me without fear. You showed me that even a monster could be loved. Suddenly, Mateo was on one knee. Mia's breath caught as he opened a velvet box. Inside, a diamond shone against the city lights. I am not a man of pretty speeches, he confessed, his voice unsteady. I am a killer, the darkness people fear. I have done terrible things, and I will do more to protect you. I am not a good man, but I love you. I love you with a heart I thought was dead until you revived it. I want to spend my life making you happy and keeping you safe. Mia. Bennett. Will you marry me? Tears of joy streamed down Mia's face. Her answer was already in her heart. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Mateo, I will. He placed the ring on her finger and rose to kiss her, sealing their future. Mia looked at the ring, then at him. 3 months ago, collapsing felt like the end, she said. It was the best thing that ever happened. It led me to you. A rare smile appeared on his face. I will always be there to catch you, he promised. They held each other, 2 broken people made whole. Mia was not rescued by a prince. She was saved by a devil. She learned that when you have nothing, a monster's protection is your only salvation. You do not always need light. Sometimes you just need a darkness strong enough to shield you from greater evils. Mateo was her shield. Their story shows that our lowest points can be new beginnings. True strength is not avoiding falls, but rising again. Love finds us in unexpected ways if we are brave enough to accept it. Most importantly, no one should have to fight their battles alone. Does this story remind you of your own life? Have you ever felt lost like Mia? Or have you hidden pain like Mateo? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, please subscribe and enable notifications. A like and a share could help someone who needs this message of hope. Your support allows us to continue creating these stories for you. Thank you for watching until the very end. We wish you and your loved ones good health, happiness, and peace. When life is hard, remember that all storms pass. Help often comes from the most unexpected places. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration to our audience.